Welcome to episode 10 of the Pro Arms Podcast. Hi, this is Gail. Mass and I are in New York talking with Bill Allard of the famous New York City Stakeout Squad.
Bill, you are really living history for people who study gunfighting and street survival. I know when I first met you back in 1972, you were on the New York City Stakeout Unit. And as you were reminding me last night, it was kind of a funny meeting.
Well, it was a rewarding career. I spent 5 years with the Stakeout Unit from 1968, May of 68, till May of 73 when the unit was disbanded. We had quite a few hundred gunfights in the unit. We kept the numbers down because it wasn't required to report things in that era of time. When we had to finally report it in the last year of existence, the numbers were there, but nowhere near what the true numbers were. Thank God for one reason. We would have just been decommissioned long before we were. We did our job.
Were you decommissioned?
In 1973, I got my set of orders on May the 11th of 73, and I went to the 17th Detective Squad in Manhattan.
Now, subsequent to that, you finished up on the Emergency Services Unit?
Yes, I did. I went to emergency service. They wanted my expertise for heavy weapons, and being a member of the Stakeout Squad, every man there was I'll say not an expert, he was a master of all the weapons, submachine gun, sniper rifle, shotgun, grenade launcher, all handguns, revolvers, and semi-automatics. Mainly in those days, we used a standard Smith & Wesson Model 38 Special Model 10 4-inch barrel. That was your service gun. Fellas also carried their 2-inch snubbies off duty with them as a backup, and many carried Browning 9mm high-powered and 1911's 45 ACPs. Unfortunately, in those days, 1968 to 73, ammunition was not what it was today. We didn't have good hollow points. Mainly it was ball. The ammo did not open up like a hollow point would today. So we were at a slight disadvantage, but we got the job done because we were highly accurate with our field of fire. And it isn't the fastest shot that wins a gunfight. It's the first shot that hits the perpetrator. And we practice 1 day a month, whereas New York City PD shot 2 days a year, 1 day inside cycle and the other day on the outside. We, as Stakeout members, shot that cycle as well as every month each squad went down and practiced. We went through all the weapons in that particular day. I was training the men, and we had 4 squads. Each squad was 10 men, so we had 40 men in the unit, 4 sergeants and 1 lieutenant squad commander, and 1 trainee. That was the composition of the unit.
Now, Bill, I remember back in the day talking with your then acting commander, Joe Volpedo, who took over when Lieutenant Brady had his heart attack. And I was good friends with your partner and our mutual friend, Jim Cirillo. Both of them told me that of all 40 men on the Stakeout Squad, you were in more gunfights and killed more offenders in gunfights than any of the others.
That's true, but I was just doing my job. It isn't something you look forward to, but it's something that has to be done. These people that would come in and rob were recidivists. It wasn't their first trip around, and they all come in armed. They didn't walk in with the hand in a pocket. When they did have the hand in the pocket, it was holding a firearm. They just didn't take it out yet. And, of course, we encountered them and engaged, and all I remember ever seeing was the flash of their guns. If I was hit, I didn't know at the time. I just returned fire, watching my front sight and squeezing the trigger.
Well, Bill, as the designated instructor for those 40 urban gunfighters, if you will, and certainly yourself the most successful among them, can you share with our listeners some of the lessons of surviving a close-range shootout that you learned personally and collectively?
Some of the lessons, and the most important one would be stay focused on your mission, what you have to do. And when you get into a gunfight, don't look at your opponent. Look at the front sight of whatever gun you're using, whether it's a pistol, rifle, or submachine gun. You focus on that and concentrate. Also, your peripheral vision will tell you what hand the perpetrator has his gun hand in. And the old FBI adage was take a step to the left. That works great if you run into a right-handed shooter. But when you have a lefty, you're going into his jerk zone. I advocate, and I always taught, you step into the hand that holds the gun, meaning that if you see the gun that's on your right side, that would indicate a left-handed shooter. You step to your right. You take that step to the right, go into the crouch position as you're drawing, and get your shot off. This way, if he does shoot, he'll jerk it over your left shoulder. If you step left and he jerks it, you're into his jerk zone. You'll be killed.
Well, Bill, you had a lot of shots fired at you, and you were never hit. And you returned a lot of fire, and I don't recall any of the stories I ever heard of you missing any of those guys.
I was very fortunate. I never missed. I was shot, but not in the NYPD. They went into another operation. But you have to focus on that front sight. And when you do, you're going to perform. People would ask me, what do you see? And I remember the 7 ridges on my 1911 on the front blade. It was a match-grade pistol I bought at Campari in 1967. And those ridges were my focal point of concentration. The human eye can depict 1/100 of an inch difference between the front sight and rear in light. You'll see that. You don't have to dress that sight up like it's going to a wedding in coat and tux and a hat and cane. Just see it pretty clear. Squeeze the trigger straight back. Don't jerk it. Come straight back. It isn't the first person that breaks the first shot that wins the gunfight. It's the first person that places the first accurate shot in the opponent that walks away a winner. So don't rush. Speed doesn't win the gunfight. Accuracy does. Accuracy is paramount. Everything else is secondary.
Bill, let's talk about some of the subtleties. I understand in most of your shootings you fired from a two-hand upright position.
That is correct. Always, and I advocate, always use all the support you can get. There were a few times when I had to drop on me because you have to realize you're coming out of a secreted place. When they see movement, they swing on you with their guns, and you are just about breaking out of the leather, so you have to react fast. And when you take that reaction, there are certain things you would do to give you the edge. You need a millisecond of an edge, and there's certain tricks I use in gunfighting that I've passed on to my members in the department that we use. When you do that, you'll walk away a winner. If you don't follow it, you may wind up in a slab in a body bag. So again, it's training, practice over and over again, and use a decent cartridge for a firearm. I'm an advocate of the 1911 45 ACP with a good hollow point, whether it's a 200 grain bullet or a 230. I find the 9mm and the 38 Special are lacking in penetration ability, meaning that if you have a side shot, you may not break that shoulder bone completely to get into the vitals of the body cavity, whereas the 45 is definitely going to break in. I can speak with validity because I've taken shots at all angles on people, whether we're running, standing still, and on a hostage situation. On a hostage situation, depending upon the situation, if the perpetrator is holding a cocked firearm to your hostage's head, there's only one shot you can take, and that's a brain shot. 2-inch band above the nose, 7 inches wide. Sighting from the center of the nose, you go 3.5 inches left and right, 2 inches wide. That's your kill zone. Stay away from the ogive of the skull. Bullets will glance off that. We've had shots where bullets glanced around. My partner, Jim Cirillo, had that happen to him. He fired 4 rounds, 2 hit the cortex of the brain, the other 2 skirted around the skull and went right out like a GI helmet. Luckily, the perpetrator died. They were running out of the place when Jim nailed him. But had it not been for those 2 shots in the center, it would have been a person running out of the store with 2 air-conditioned holes in his head. That's about it, and they got the money.
Speaking of getting the hits and, using enough gun, it seems like some of your shootings were living proof of the fact that just having a 45 or a 12 gauge isn't quite enough.
It's not. You don't know what you're going to run into. I had one shooting that amounted to 73 puncture wounds in the human body. When you shoot somebody in NYPD, the body goes to the morgue, and the pathologist has to measure usually they start at the heel of the right foot and run up to the center line of the spine with a ruler, and they'll measure how many centimeters up the first hole is, and they'll put a rod through that hole. and they'll see what the distance is. Now, where the rod comes out, they measure that downwards, and they can tell the angle of the shot. When you get people that are on drugs or some barbiturates, it's amazing how much punishment they can take. They suck up lead like a sponge sucks up water. And you think, well, you're in a gunfight. Am I hitting this guy? He's running, he's shooting at me, and yet he's not going down. And I dumped a 12-gauge shotgun into him, all 5 rounds, and he's still trying to kill you. I've had that happen to me, and I've had it where you shot them once and they went down and they died. But taking up that many shots, it makes you wonder how much punishment a human being can take. And until you've engaged in that situation, you'll find out how much they can take. And that is awesome at times.
Well, Bill, I recall back in the day, you telling me about one that you'd had then recently, where you wound up having to go through 3 guns and finally reload before the protoplasm stopped twitching. Can you tell our listeners what happened and just how quickly it all happened?
That was in the fight I just mentioned where the one perpetrator had 73 holes in him. It was 2 males that came in to stick up a motel out by JFK Airport, and we were staked out. My partner at the time was Jim Cirillo. A uniformed sergeant had entered the premises. We never told the uniformed people we were back there. And he checked in with the manager, everything was okay, and he left shortly thereafter. And he wasn't gone a minute or two when the 2 perpetrators walked in. I surmised that they were watching him. Turned out they were. They had a white Volkswagen parked outside. They were sitting in it. And the minute he walked out, they walked in with a rifle cut down, and they had it under a serape. It was 2 males, and one looked like a female with the afro on. So I thought it was just something that we were going to rent the room and go have a party in it, boyfriend, girlfriend, but that wasn't the case. They walked down the aisle too rapidly and too serious. My alarm bells went off. And I told Jim, I think it's going down. Well, when he lifted the serape off, I knew it went down right then and there. The barrel was cut. We go right through our armor. And he took the butt and hit the clerk in the eye with it and popped the eye out and drove the glass into the eye socket. The other one went and got the money out of the safe. And now he walked the manager. He took the rifle and walked the manager right past me. We were behind a one-way piece of glass. And I looked at how he was dressed. He was dressed quite nicely. So I figured, you know what? He doesn't want to get his clothes bloody with the blood splatter if he shoots this guy. And which is true. He made the manager back off. He backed away from him, giving him enough room. When the bullet hit, it would not splatter his new clothes that were all pressed. So at that moment when he stepped back, that's when I took my shot. Prior to that, I thought about pulling the trigger on him, and my mind said, no, if you shoot him and that gun goes off and he kills the manager, that is on my conscience. I would think that I'd be responsible for killing that man. So I waited, and as it turned out, it was a good decision. When he stepped back, I kicked the door open and leveled the shotgun at him. He turned with the rifle to me, but I was faster on the trigger, and I shot him straight away at a distance of about 6 feet, maybe no more than 6.5 feet. And I shot 3 times. I shot him once, his partner, and they started to run, and I engaged again and let the last round of 00 buck go, and the last 2 rounds in the Ithaca were 2 12-gauge slugs. My partner, Cirillo, fired 4 rounds, I believe, 3 00 buck and 1 slug, and I didn't know he even shot. I don't hear anything because you're so intense on what you're doing, you don't pay attention to any other noises. When it was all over, I walked down, and Jim said he fired 3 rounds plus 1 slug, so I never heard the gun go off. I had fired all of my 12-gauge, and when both of them were down, I fired 3 rounds of a 38 special in one perp and 3 rounds in the other perp. The one perp without the rifle in his hand, he succumbed to those wounds. He was out of the picture. The other guy kept trying to line me up. He's spitting blood, holding a rifle, and I proceeded to draw my backup gun, my .45 1911, and I shot him 8 times in the heart and 1 through the chin into his brains, and that was the end of it. He succumbed, and the gunfight was over. The entire gunfight didn't last more than probably 4 to 5 seconds. That was it. It's rapid, and you must think rapidly, and that's where I advocate training. We shot, as I said earlier, once a month. Police officers do not shoot enough. It's the bean counters that stop it. They don't want to spend the money on training, but yet they'll spend hundreds of millions of dollars on frivolous lawsuits because the officers were not trained properly.
Now, Bill, you were famous for your shooting skill. In 1982, after your retirement, you won the National Bullseye Championship at Camp Perry. Tell us where you got most of your training. How much was from the department? How much was on your own? And how much did your competitive skill and competitive experience factor into your survival?
I won the U.S. National Civilian Pistol Championship in 1982, as you said. My skills were not so much acquired from the department as they were from the Army marksmanship manuals that I read. I was more or less self-taught. In 1970, I shot my way on to the All-National Guard pistol team, and I stayed with them for 10 years until I retired. Marksmanship is paramount in a gunfight. If you don't have the skills to squeeze that trigger and keep your sights aligned, you're not going to walk out a winner all the time. You may be a loser. But by reading those manuals and going to competition, it helped me to survive in a gunfight. Competition is very competitive. It teaches you to be competitive. And in the long run, you'll be a better shooter for it. But you have to, I call it, pay your dues. You have to practice. You just can't say, oh, I bought 10 boxes of ammo. That's like buying 10 gallons of gasoline, putting it in the car, but don't drive the car. What good is having the ammo if you don't use it?
Oh, would it be safe to say that the competition had made shooting and hitting under stress second nature by the time you joined the Stakeout Squad?
Absolutely. When I went into competition, I only focused on winning that match. I focused on what I had to do to win it, sight alignment, trigger control, and mainly that was it. In a gunfight, it was the same thing. When I get into a gunfight, I wasn't concerned with the weapons that the opponents had. I was more concerned with hitting them, and usually I hit them on my first shot out of the holster.
Okay, Bill, you told me earlier that unlike some of the advice that we see in print, you always used a very hard grasp on your pistol, both in competition and in gunfights. Can you tell our listeners why?
Well, the harder you can grab it, I'll try to equate it to you in poundage. Let's say that you can hold a pistol with 20 pounds of pressure, and I can hold it with double that, 40 pounds of pressure. That's going to reduce the recoil of my gun over yours, so it lets me get on target much faster. Also, I shoot from right to left. Why right to left? You follow the recoil of the gun. If you're shooting from left to right, that's ludicrous. You're against yourself. Years ago, I went to a falling plate match in Hempstead, PD, which I never shot before. So I elected not to shoot the first and second relay. I wanted to watch how they played this game. It was brand new to me. And I took my standard 1911 out there, my National Match Perry gun, and I saw that accuracy played a very key part here. Don't worry about how fast you are, but don't go back over to hit a plate. When you fire that shot, the plate has to go down. And when you fired it, don't look at the plate to see if you hit it. You'll know if you hit it. Your gut instinct tells you. And I just whacked 5 plates on a stand, and by the time I hit the 5th plate, the first plate finally hit the base. They don't take, they don't go down right away. It takes a moment or two. And if you're shooting rapidly from right to left, the recoil takes you into the next plate. At the end of the match, I came in second. I lost it by 0.4 of a second to a guy who's been shooting it all his life. This is my first time out, and I was using a stock gun. This young fella comes over and says, "You cheated." I said, "Son, I never cheated in my life. How do you figure I cheated?" He said, "You shot from left to right." Someone told him that's how you should shoot, from left to right. And I just looked at him and smiled and says, "Well, if you want to do that, that's up to you, but show me where in this program it says I have to shoot from left to right. It doesn't tell you that." He said, "Well, I was taught that way." Well, I told him, some idiot taught you how to shoot, and you'll never be a national champion in your whole day.
Bill, you've seen pretty much the whole competitive scene develop from your early days in Bullseye through PPC to IPSC and IDPA. Tell us what each has to offer for the person who is looking at competition as a venue of developing survival skills.
Bullseye is a great game. It may be boring to some because you're shooting at a paper target. You're not moving. The target doesn't move. But it teaches one the basic concept of marksmanship in that you're looking at your front sight, you're squeezing the trigger, you've got good position, you got a good grip on the gun, and when a gun's fired, it comes back to that natural point of aim, meaning that I do not have to adjust my body or my arm to get back in the center of that bullseye. Once the gun goes off, that gun recoils right back to its natural point of aim, dead center, and all I have to do is on the way down from recoil, I'm squeezing that trigger. On a 4-pound trigger, I've taken up about half the weight, 2 pounds or slightly more, and as I'm coming through the target, I just finish the squeeze, and I know it's a good shot. You can tell when you got a bullseye, and I've done that. Getting back to IDPA, I like the sport. It's realistic because it lets you use your own firearm that you carry every day. Whereas IPSC, I don't have nothing against the sport, but it's more of a bullseye game on a different set of rules. They use revolvers that got gas pipes on them, wings on the sights, you name it. It's not realistic. It isn't a gun you would carry off-duty in a holster on the street, whereas IDPA, you would carry the gun off-duty. It's practical shooting.
Bill, safe to say you still carry a gun every day of your life?
24/7. The only time I don't have it on is in the shower. If I had a tight plastic bag, I'd probably wear it there too.
Bill, is it safe to say the mindset is the single most important element of survival?
Absolutely. Shooting is, I would say, a minimum of 95% mental, 95 to 98%. The rest is physical, muscle tone, reaction. But basically, it's a mental discipline game. I've won many matches in my lifetime, and I've lost quite a few also. I don't mind losing because I've lost to a person who made less mistakes than I did that particular day. I never forget shooting in the Marine Corps base at Quantico, Virginia, in 1973. I had a nice day. I shot a .293 on a 50-yard course with the service pistol, the .45 automatic with full ball ammo, and I won the match. There were maybe 10 shooters there, or maybe a little more than that could have won that match that day. I won because I made the least amount of mistakes. All our guns were capable of a clean score of 300, and just don't foul up. That's what it boils down to. There were times when I wasn't as high a shooter. Why? I just said, F it, let the shot go. Don't let that happen to you. If you have that attitude to let it go because you've had the gun up 2 or 3 times and you figure that's my best effort, squeeze it off. And when you do, say, wow, it's an 8. Not too bad, but you're down 2 points. It's a bitch when you lose a match by 1 point and you made so many mistakes. You says, wow, I could have won this by 20 points. I've had it happen to me. I never forget trying to break 2,600. I had many 25.99s, 98s, 97s. One day I went up to a good friend of mine, he's deceased now, Al Dinan. He was a master gunsmith and a national champ at Camp Perry. And Al asked me one day, he says, Bill, how many times you say F it and let the shot go? I says, quite a few. He says, don't do it today. I used to shoot a match against him in Connecticut, up in around Wallingford, I think he was. Anyhow, that particular day I went over 2,600. I says, gosh, I finally did it. The next match was Princeton, New Jersey, and it was pouring raining out. I shot that match. I couldn't keep the gun box cover open to see the target. I closed the door, and at the end of the day, my score was 26-01. I was 1 point over in horrendous wind and rain conditions. And from that day on, I never looked back. I never shot below 2,600. It was like the fellow that broke the 4-minute mile. Was it Roger Bannister, I believe? Once he broke it, there were many racers that broke it. But prior to that, no one can do it. Why? It's a mental block, like shooting. No one's broken a score, so I can't do it. Don't ever think yourself that way. Don't sell yourself short. Go for it. Concentrate. Don't give that shot away. If you're a reloader and you're spending hours reloading ammunition and you're shooting your reloads, tell yourself, hey, I made this stuff. Do I want to waste it? Don't waste it. Put the gun down on the bench, rebreathe, regrasp it, bring it up again. If you're satisfied with what you see, squeeze the trigger. If you're not, put it down again. Don't lose the match by 2 or 3 points. Because at the end of the day, you'll say, wow, I could have made those points. You gave it away.
Bill, I want to thank you for taking the time today to share your observations with our listeners. Looks like we're going to be able to get you down to Pro Arms Country in North Florida and run a seminar.
I would look forward to that. And as I said to you, I'd gladly do it, especially in the winter months when we get a lot of snow in New York. I'd welcome going down to Florida, getting the suntan and shooting. It'd be happiness. It's like putting a cat in a fish market.
Well, we'll make it all work, Bill. As soon as we get dates worked out, we'll post it on the website and the podcast.
That's it for this episode number 10 of the Pro Arms Podcast. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Pro Arms Podcast music is by Kevin MacLeod.